Welcome everybody to steal a page out of my guest book here. Yo 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 yo, as he likes to open his videos here. Rob, is it 3 years or four? Usually three, right?
Let's see. Yo, yo, yo. Yeah, three. So we got
Okay,
three.
awesome,
It just kind of rolls
awesome.
off the tongue at this point.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, did a previous video with him. I mean, Rob is the man here. So doing a little week zero, week one college football discussion. Man, I can't believe summer's finally coming to an end. Sadly, as big of a summer fan as I am. But yeah, college football, man, starts this week. Let's go, baby. You know, Pumped, man. Saturday, 12 o'clock, Iowa State, Kansas State's the first game, correct?
Yes, it is, and it's in Ireland. It's a fun rivalry game. It's a ranked reverse ranked game, and in terms of the Big 12, like it's a super meaningful game. Like wouldn't surprise me if it comes down to Kansas State and Iowa State at the very end of the year. That's just kind of how the Big 12 dynamic is looking right now.
Now, do you think there's going to be more combined points scored or guys named Liam and Connor in the stands? What do you think there's going to be more of?
I'm thinking Liam and Connor because I
Yeah.
really do think that when you go over those time zones, we saw it last year with Georgia Tech and Florida State, and obviously that narrative kind of changed because Florida State turned out to be a complete dud. But I think from that standpoint, that was one of the sloppier games that I can recall. And Georgia Tech obviously flourished with Haynes King down the stretch of the season. And I think when you're looking at just one, that time zone jump, two, the week zero game, and kind of being in a weird environment, and also not really having your own bearings just in general, especially with a team like an Iowa State that's turning over a ton of skill position talent. I feel like you're not going to be able to move the ball effectively enough. And you kind of got to lean on one, just a consistent ground game, which they have, and that defense that can be a little bit up in the air, but it's probably their most solid unit going into the season. And from that standpoint, I really do think the total of 49.5 is like baiting people to take the over, because you look at those points for the last two seasons with these two guys or these two teams, it looks like it should be going way higher. But I really do think this is going to be one of those games that finishes like 24-20.
Yeah, there might be an entire section of guys named Liam Malone there. Probably just the best Irish name out there, Liam and Connor. So, yeah, man. I mean, so we'll talk a little bit about obviously best games that you're looking forward to. I didn't want to touch as much on the ranked versus ranked matchups. With that type of stuff here, we'll go over those. But obviously, those are the games that everyone's looking forward to. But outside of those, man, I know your bread and butter, your specialty is I love seeing the Rob rundown. The Buffaloes versus Georgia Southern type games here, man. Like what are a couple games that you're keeping your eye on? That are intriguing. That might be not a ranked versus ranked matchup. It could be ranked versus unranked or two unranked. But what are a couple games you got your eye on that might intrigue people?
Well, one of the kind of the big G5 brands over the past, I guess, maybe a decade, maybe, it actually probably expands way past a decade now that I'm kind of thinking about it. But Western Kentucky, WKU, I mean, everybody remembers their air raid years under Jeff Brom and,
Hmm.
Brandon Dowdy, Bailey Zappi, all the QBs that Mike White that have kind of filtered in and out of there and have really put up some serious numbers. And the question always was with that team, well, are they just kind of like, picking on the G5 because they have this scheme that nobody can match? Well, recent years, they've kind of branched away from that. And now all of a sudden, based on off-season reports, they're going back to that style. We might be seeing the vintage WKU breaking out again. And, in this week zero draw that they have with Sam Houston, it's a really fun one because Sam Houston, I don't know how good they're going to be, post Casey Keeler era, but I do think when you look at the dynamic and the players that they still have in house, specifically at quarterback with Hunter Watson, you're talking about a gunslinger. So you're talking about maybe vintage WKU, a gunslinger on the other side. I am loving a lot of points there. I think that could be like 60-60, and it's just going to be really fantastic to kind of get the season kicked off that way.
And for the novice fans, you got one of the best logo mascots with the guy waving the towel for Western Kentucky, and you have the Sam Houston State Bearcats with a K. So a lot of cool stuff to look forward to. But Casey Keeler, man, Delaware's old coach, I didn't know he was there. So that's a tremendous pull there.
Yeah, well, now he's bounced. He's coaching Temple, and he's kind
Oh
of
wow.
moving up all the way. And we'll see how his Temple tenure goes. But certainly at Sam Houston, he achieved well, and we'll kind of see what happens with this next transition into a new coaching tree, because they're still kind of relatively new within the landscape of college basketball or college football at the D1 level.
So I guess we'll jump a little bit ahead since you just mentioned Temple. So Temple UMass. So after that game, obviously one of the teams has to come away victorious, right? So over under a number of combined wins by both teams after that game. Do you think it's more or less than three?
Well, I'm a big Casey Keeler guy. Like, I think I don't know how good Temple's going to be in year one with him, because that's kind of a reclamation project. But at the same time, I don't think UMass is putting up many wins outside of this game if they can get it on the front end. I think probably we're looking at over under 4.5. And I think maybe we're kind of talking about Temple picking up the 4.
Rob, I did. I spoke with Sam Panayotovich from Fox Sports like a couple weeks ago, and I gave him some over unders, and I did number of total football minutes that Kent State is going to be leading this year. Not factoring in that they're playing Merrimack, but obviously I said at 15 minutes, and he took the over due to the Merrimack game. But he did propose something that I want to run by you. In their final 11 games after that, how many total quarters of football do you think they have the lead in those 11 games afterwards?
Oh my goodness. I don't know if they can score first against any reputable opponent. And that kind of eliminates that like leading side of things, because they might be
Right.
tied 0-0 based on just ineptness. But I don't know, man. Kent State is in this really terrible place, and they should have just hired Sean Lewis back, made any kind of push to bring that man back in the fold. But here we go. We're seeing this kind of new tenure, and I don't think it's off to a great start.
This is what makes college football great. I have the quad box for YouTube, but if I go out somewhere for the game, I'm gonna ask if there's any way they can put Kent State Merrimack on, just strictly to see how bad that football is. Where in the NFL, you're never watching Titans Jags, you know what I mean, of all the games, but it's like
Right.
just to see college, just to see it all in there and see how bad those teams are versus obviously number one versus number two, or number one versus number
Mhm.
three out there is going to be kind of crazy. But I guess just yeah, to go into the, I'm also very intrigued by Tennessee Syracuse. Now that Syracuse kind of just named their starter, and it was a guy who has some experience, and then you have Tennessee with Nico leaving, and kind of the expectations of, hey, we're Tennessee, we kind of got over that hump. And as you mentioned last time, you know, could be a bunch of brand new playoff teams. Like, what is that pressure like on Tennessee, and how do you go about betting, like knowing kind of those factors in there? I mean, they're laying 13.5 against the power conference team that granted lost Colin McCord and kind of overachieved last year, but I think Syracuse plus 13.5 is very, very live. What are your thoughts on that game?
Yeah, and especially because it's not in Neyland, right? There's a kind
Right.
of a neutralizing factor when you're not playing Tennessee where they want be. And from that standpoint, I feel like when you're looking at Syracuse, there was kind of a weird, almost resurgence buzz at the back end of the season where I didn't necessarily give Fran Brown, I think, a ton of credit or deserved credit as the season was going on until the very end there. But looking at the roster he's put together, looking at the recruits he's bringing in, there's a serious energy. And sure, it might turn out to be kind of a Mike Loxley situation where we have kind of that pull up 1 year almost flash in the pan, and everybody's like, hey, maybe we can keep this train going and even improve it, and then it just kind of plateaus or completely flatlines. But under Fran Brown, like, why not give him a chance here? And 14 points is a very large buffer. Like, I'm seeing 14 out there with minus 110 odds. I don't really understand why people are jumping on Tennessee with so much roster turnover, specifically at QB, and just thinking, oh yeah, this is going to be the Tennessee with Hendon Hooker and Nico Iamaleava. No, we have this kind of weird spot that Tennessee's in where they don't have that solidified quarterback for the first time in like 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, so I guess touch on that a little bit. Any other fishy lines out there that kind of leave you scratching your head? And how do you think Vegas is adjusting now to normal? This isn't 5 years ago where it's like they set a line, in August and maybe or early like July, maybe it doesn't move or whatever. But now, given the transfer portal, all the NIL, all of the instability there, even not naming starting quarterbacks, like how do you think the lines have adjusted, and how do you think bettors like yourself have adjusted? And any line out there besides the one that we mentioned that might be a little fishy on your end?
Yeah, I think there's a few different ones. And I really kind of look at the brands that have kind of risen up in recent years or getting maybe almost like overcredited based on the revival of the program. And notably, I'm going to name Kansas because I think there's a lot of upside with Kansas, but there's a lot of unknown within that upside. It's not like we know what Kansas's roster is going to perform like on the field with a solid baseline. But when you're looking at Kansas from the standpoint of, okay, well, if Jalen Daniels is healthy, are they going to be a good team? I still can't give you a definitive answer. I know he's going to be good if he's fully healthy, but we haven't seen him fully healthy in quite some time. And they're going up against Fresno State and Matt Entz, who I don't know if people know college football, but if you are looking for a potential upset, you might want to refer to the guy who coached football at North Dakota State for,
Okay.
half of a decade. And I believe in Matt Entz. I think when you're getting 12 and a half points like he is in that game against a team that is a very big unknown, hey, put my money on it. Don't even think twice. I think a money line at, a 4-1 type of price is actually a very good stab early in week 0.
Yeah, and this kind of goes back to a little bit difference from the last couple of years. It's how hot Kansas was at the end of the year. It would make sense to kind of play that rush. It's like, oh, provided a lot of people are returning, you have the momentum, but the transfer portal, you could have the momentum in the world, and then boom, your team is gone and you're starting kind of over again. So that is a very interesting line. It's almost kind of like you want the unknown, you want the coach, the new coach that's coming in, and is bringing his own players or kind of doing things that way. That might be actually more of a cohesive unit than kind of coming into a returning team that kind of lost players in there and wondering where they want to go. And I mean, I guess Kansas is Kansas, but props to them for scheduling a game like that week 1 instead of scheduling an absolute cupcake. Because I'm with you, that should be a hell of a game. And Fresno State has always been interesting and never really shied away from playing anyone. So, and we don't have to stay up till 11 o'clock at night to watch that game. So that definitely a good one there, man. So, cool. So to touch base, I guess I also like, my upset special is Toledo over Kentucky, but we'll touch more on those a little bit later. But obviously, Ohio State, Texas, just one of the few really, really big games in there. Not much bigger than that. Arch Manning against I forget the guy's name that they just announced as Ohio State's quarterback. So both teams, man. I mean, obviously, pretty much locks given the wagon completely falling off and God knows what's happening. But is there anything that you'll see from either team that's going to make you scratch your head and be like, maybe they're not, barring a major injury, of course, but saying maybe they're not the team that we think they could be? Or is it kind of just the winner's going to win, the loser's going to lose, and we'll see them both in the college football playoff?
Well, I think there's a lot to be kind of proven by Texas, to be honest with you, because last year, in terms of a 10-year scope, we can go over a 10-year scope. We can even use a 5-year scope, but there's only 1 year that stands out where the secondary actually performed for the Texas Longhorns, and it was last season. But from the most part, when you look at the quarterbacks they faced in the first 8 weeks, it was like second and third stringers because of injuries, or it was UL Monroe with John David Booty, who, actually got injured in that game. And UL Monroe went from being within the game at halftime to completely out of the game once he left. And then we saw obviously what happened in the college football playoff where Texas got bludgeoned by Sam Levitt. It was kind of an onslaught of, okay, white man Cam Scadaboo, 5'10", 230, coming out of the backfield, going for 200 receiving yards or whatever it was. And it makes you at least kind of have that worry of, well, did we just kind of see like a flash in the pan or almost like a flukish type of season? What happens when they go up against Jeremiah Smith and this Ohio State passing attack and even just more reputable teams? Now, on the side of Ohio State, you have quarterback turnover. You have no idea how, some of those guys are going to perform in their first start out. But I think when you're looking at that game and just the trajectory of both of these teams, I think Texas with Arch Manning, like, that's still a roster turnover. It's not like Arch Manning has proven that, oh, he's a solidified, he's Caleb Williams. We know how talented he is. He's going to be the heir apparent for the Heisman, yet we're treating him in that way where he's just going to step in and dominate. And I think a large part, it's because Texas is really good or was good last year, and he's got the last name Manning, whether we like it or not. And we have seen enough flashes from him where it's like, okay, if he can put that together for a complete season, great. But I remember talking about Jacob Eason at Georgia and Washington in the same kind of vein, 10 years ago or whatever it was now at this point. And from that reason, I like to pump my brakes on these types of quarterbacks. And I even kind of like to directly fade them in the early goings of the season.
Yeah, and I'm curious to see if Sark is going to coach where, obviously Arch does have the, hey, I'm Arch Manning, you can't pull me for whatever, or if they're struggling and he's struggling in that game in particular to move the ball, will he pull him, kind of thing, and that, or does he value it as, hey, we're probably going to outclass the rest of our schedule. We lose this game, we kind of just develop and ease into it. And it'll be interesting to see how Arch's Heisman hopes move, and he might actually be worth a bet if they lose that game, and he kind of dips to, maybe top 10 in the race, in there. But very, very interesting because I'm still not a Texas believer myself either. I do think they have a lot of talent, but there's a lot of teams with a lot of talent. And like you said, they've gotten over the hump to an extent, but they haven't really. So it'll be interesting. And Ohio State's playing with nothing to lose. I mean, all the pressure is off Ryan Day now, win the national title. Michigan just got busted for cheating. So a little bit of a vindication for Ohio State, I guess, a little bit. But yeah, man, it should be a hell of a game. And I mean, again, props on that matchup. But how are you going to play the game, and how would you play it if you don't play it? Like, what would be a bet that you would like?
Well, it's one of those things where if you want to believe in Texas just kind of being the same kind of defense that they were last year, then you want to take the under, because obviously going up against a freshman QB making his, first ever start in college football is a very, nice size platter when you're talking about a unit that performed like a top 10 unit last season. Now, if you're on my side of the coin where you're thinking, well, I think Texas was actually a little bit fraudulent when it comes down to it, I think from that standpoint on the defensive side, target an over, because I do think that Arch Manning and that Texas offense and Sark just in general, being an offensive mind, they're going to be able to put up points even on the best defenses all season long somehow. And on the other side, Ohio State, if they can take advantage of those deep balls down the field to Jeremiah Smith, that's probably going to be good for a few touchdowns there too. So I really do like taking a shot at an over, whether it's through the first half or through the full game.
I'm pulling that lineup on FanDuel right now. I'm trying to see what it's at. Yeah, so FanDuel has 47.5 on there, and Ohio State minus 2.5. So kind of right on where you think the, I guess the point total will be, or you think it could go soar over that into the 50s?
Well, I think it's respecting both defenses, and, and again, it just kind of comes down to your own personal handicap. If you feel like, Texas is going to pick up right where they left off, it wasn't a fluke, they can perform against anybody, you go ahead and you take that under pretty confidently, because that's a good dangled number for an under, with two really good teams in the first week of the season or first game. But I'm really liking the over, because I don't really kind of buy in that Texas has suddenly just fixed all their woes in one season, and that's what we should expect kind of moving forward.
Is there a team that you think, based on, the matchup, and then some of them play in week 0 and week 1, but just either team in week 0 or week 1 that maybe has a tough week 2 or week 3 game that could be like fool's gold that could lead us to see an inflated line in week 2 or maybe even week 3 on that? Is there one team that stands out to you on that aspect?
Yeah, when I look at Indiana, for example, going up against Old Dominion, Old Dominion's kind of one of those teams that right now, they have a really, I think, good reputation of putting up good fights because of some battles with Virginia Tech over the years and just some battles in that region alone. But from this standpoint, this Old Dominion team, they feel a little bit diluted. And I do think that Indiana, coming out of the gates hot, could put a number up on Old Dominion. And then all of a sudden we're kind of thinking, all right, well, Indiana's kind of back to form. They're going to go 10-2, 9-3 again. It's almost written in stone. Curt Cignetti never loses, right? But I feel like from that standpoint, that's where I really want to bet against Indiana, because I do think that Indiana was a good team last year. Don't get me wrong. And I think they get a bad rap for how it kind of came to a close. But when you have that much roster turnover of losing all the James Madison guys, losing Curtis Rourke and replacing him with Fernando Mendoza, who I'm not crazy about, I feel like if they can put up a number early, get everybody believing again, that's where I want to be on the other side of them. And I do think that's probably the trajectory that ends up happening.
It's so funny because what is it, week 3 where they play Illinois, and you're gonna have Illinois, who's everyone's
Oh
darling, who
yeah.
comes off, who goes Duke sandwich game with, I believe, Western Michigan, and then that Indiana game. And I think Illinois is a prime letdown spot for week 2. Where I'm curious to see what that line would be, and kind of maybe Western Michigan making their way into one of your videos. I'd imagine for week 2 for a little line there, but yeah, man. I guess also I think very very intriguing another power conference matchup, but just kind of with the turnover that you're talking about, a team that massively underachieved last year with Utah, with Cam Rising and the injury report, and then the landing spot for Nico and UCLA, a team that kind of people are, could they be the team that maybe this is their year, or is it kind of down the road next year? What an intriguing matchup, I guess, to start the season. What are your thoughts on that game? And is there either team that, like, after this game you're going to be more confident, or is it kind of, hey, you think by the end of the season one or both will be kind of where you expected them to be?
Well, with all even the good Kyle Whittingham Utah teams, there have been a lot of slow starters where in the first 2 weeks of the season, they have a clunker. They win a lot of those clunkers. But when you're talking about a game that's spotting UCLA at home, 6.5 points, it's just one of those things where I feel like we're going overboard on the UCLA hate combined with the overboard on the Utah love of thinking they could just get right back to, traditional Kyle Whittingham football. And I do think that Utah is going to be obviously much improved this season with stability at quarterback. I don't think that, having the Cam Rising thing of, and maybe he plays this week, only to never play the week that he's supposed to play until he comes back and then gets immediately hurt. Like, I think that dynamic being gone is very, very good for the winnability of them moving forward. But 6.5 laying out the gate is almost kind of like seemingly a little bit disrespectful to UCLA and actually how they overperformed expectations last season in the Big Ten. So I do like taking UCLA, and I wouldn't go as far as taking the money line in that spot just because Utah wins in those residuals, and that's probably what it comes down to if it's within the margin of 6.5. But I do like taking the points there with UCLA.
Well, I like how you gave UCLA credit for actually having a home field, Rob. So well done there with the
At the very
sleepy.
least, at the very
It,
least, it's not in Salt Lake City, right?
that's true. Yes, yeah, it's not in altitude. Yes, and they are in California, so they could just wake up in their own beds essentially. But I guess just give us a couple upset specials. I mean, I gave you, or games that you're going to be on with, maybe either taking the dog plus the points and outright, and tell me I'm either an idiot or I'm a genius for my Toledo. Definitely getting the 8.5, but possibly money line at Kentucky pick.
Wouldn't it be the first time we've seen Toledo knock off a middling SEC score, right? I mean, they did it against Mississippi State when Mississippi State had, Mike Leach at the helm, and that was actually a pretty respectable Mississippi State team at the tail end of things. Kentucky, I feel like, is actually kind of trending almost like in a downwards motion right now, where I have no idea what to expect from them. Toledo is always very consistent in that regard of being ready to go and being able to perform. I don't mind that pick at all, especially with the value line in the first half and on the full game. My kind of almost definitive upset where I'm like, I'm hammering this. This is one of my favorite ones right out the gate here in not week 0, but week 1 would actually be South Florida taking on Boise State. Yep. Boise State was one of those teams that obviously had a dream season. They made the first expanded playoff. They made it as a semifinal because they got the G5 slot locked up as well. And they played pretty respectably against Penn State for the most part, I would say, given what everybody's expectations of how they would perform actually ended up being. And from that standpoint, South Florida is a team that last year had a ton of hype under Alex Golesh and Byron Brown at quarterback, but Byron Brown got hurt really early in the season, and they kind of went through this ping-ponging effect, almost kind of like a Utah, where no stability at quarterback. They still won some games, but it just never felt like they could find consistency. Well, Byron Brown's back. Alex Golesh is probably still looking for, his next job post this season. And it starts, I think, with week 1, where you get this darling from last year on a platter. And I really do like Boise State, especially away from, Boise. I think South Florida is really getting a good leg up here.
Awesome. Yeah, I kind of was targeting that game as well. I wasn't as high on, or didn't know as much about South Florida, but I did know that they were kind of like, or think that they were up and coming. So traveling all the way across the country, that's definitely an interesting spot there. another team that obviously there will probably be more Boise State fans there than South Florida fans. As a Tampa resident for a few months back in 2019, I went to the USF Wisconsin game, and you might as well have thought that that game was in Madison. I mean, obviously Wisconsin, Boise State are different brands, but it'll be interesting to see if Golesh can get that program to the point where it's like, they're actually getting a home crowd, and kind of get it rolling because they have all the, I mean, you're in a warm weather environment, you have the resources, and why can't you come out of that conference and be a group of 5 representative there? So, definitely interesting start. And I mean, that's South Florida Super Bowl there to start as well, too.
Oh,
So, I guess before we get into kind of betting strategy for week 0 and week 1, just a couple of the big games to talk about here. Tell me who you think the game is, I guess, more important for out of these teams, or if you think, the loser is in any sort of trouble whatsoever of, not fulfilling expectations or missing the college football playoff. LSU, Clemson, and Notre Dame, Miami. Kind of thoughts on those? I mean, are we expected to see all 4 of those teams hang around, or is there one where if they lose, you could be like, okay, they could be in trouble for the rest of the year, or it's almost a must win for one of those 4 teams?
Well, personally, when you look at Miami and just the roster turnover that they had, that's being overlooked because you don't go from Cam Ward to Carson Beck and get better. I'm sorry, that's just as straightforward as it gets. I mean, Carson Beck was great when the pocket was clean in Georgia, and he had 15, All-Americans and NFL guys in the 2 deeps, catching passes down the field for him. But isolated, when you look at Carson Beck's game, he's actually like a worse, Luke Altmaier, for example, because he's less athletic. He's a pocket kind of cement-footed quarterback who, can kind of lace it, but has a lot of erratic behavior in terms of downfield throwing ability. Well, now you're throwing him into an offense where Cam Ward last year was doing everything he could. He was playing like it lights out, and they were still almost losing to Cal. They were losing to Syracuse at the end of the year. They were almost losing to Duke at home. And it's one of those things where do I think that Miami can just replicate it with that position being drastically worse? Heck no. I feel like Miami could be, firing Mario Cristobal by week 8 of this season. Like that would not shock me one bit. So, from that standpoint, out the gate, I am definitely looking to fade Miami. And especially with kind of the public narrative that I'm seeing, I think it's like a perfect little blend of everything going right to bet against them right out the gate.
I'm very, very anti Notre Dame, as just as a person with a rooting interest there. I hate Notre Dame, but they were such a gold mine last year, and I don't understand how anyone would be on Miami in the situation given everything that you said there. And I mean, I haven't seen the line, but Notre Dame by a touchdown plus seems pretty easy. I mean, Notre Dame is just going to come out, and granted, obviously they don't have Hartman back there, but still a well coached team against a team, like you said, in Miami, that Carson Beck is more known for his girlfriend than his ex-girlfriend now at this point than his performance on the field. But I do think that if Beck comes out maybe more focused and even with less talent around him, kind of thing, it'll be interesting to see because there was talk of the guy being the number 1 pick a couple years ago, and I never saw that. I was never a Carson Beck guy, but people, of your ilk, Rob, who know college football and are encyclopedias, they are all over Carson Beck too. I've seen, a lot of different narratives on him. So there's something there maybe with the guy, so it'll be interesting to see kind of how he does come out. But yeah, you're right. I think Notre Dame is, we're going to be poised for another, well, Notre Dame probably shouldn't be as high as they are. And then at the end of the season, they're as high as they are. And then, they come out in the college football playoff and we want to bet against them. And then they're there just hanging around. As sad as that's going to be. I'll be rooting for Miami, but yeah, like you said, if there's any shekels going on there, it'll probably be on Notre Dame's side. But Clemson, LSU, I mean, we've seen Brian Kelly struggle and lose games early, but he keeps scheduling, man. And, a lot of people are high on Clemson. A lot of people at the value they are think that this could be one of the 3 or 4 national title teams in there. And their defense is legit, going against Nussmeier. Is LSU in trouble if they lose that game given their schedule, where I think Clemson has a lot more wiggle room because Clemson's going to be pretty much favored in every single other game there? Is that a must win for LSU?
I think it's a must win for LSU from the standpoint of the world's going to be on fire around Brian Kelly if he drops another big game, because you can't drop all those quotes of, It was impossible to win at Notre Dame. I had to come to LSU to build up enough talent to actually win a championship. And then the guy who replaced you at Notre Dame goes in and within 3 years has them competing in a national championship. And if you look at the roster talent, Notre Dame is by far the more talented roster than LSU. So I think that narrative is going to be a real driving force if things don't go well for Brian Kelly right out the gate. And from that standpoint, I do feel like almost Clemson is getting a little bit overrated at this point, where everybody's expecting to see that Cade Klubnik jump. But what if we already saw the Cade Klubnik jump, and he's just the Cade Klubnik that we saw make the jump last season, and that's all we get? I think from that standpoint, Clemson has a definitive ceiling, and it's not a national championship. It's kind of where they landed last season, because I don't think they underwhelmed last year, but they definitely didn't live up to the high ceiling that was set for them. And from that standpoint too, they've got a tough kind of open window to the season here, where they're playing LSU out the gate. Then in the week 4 or week 3, they're playing Georgia Tech right out the gate at Georgia Tech. They're going to be up against it, and we're going to find out about them real fast. I don't want to be backing them early, but I also probably don't want to be backing LSU. So that's one of those games where I probably just ultimately stay away and just watch as a fan.
I mean, Georgia Tech could be a team that could find their way to the ACC title game, I think, without really much of a surprise to some people there. And if they go in and smack Colorado around, and then that week 4 game could be, possibly ranked versus ranked, and, maybe a college game day appearance there. So definitely great foreshadowing there. Just pulling up some lines here real fast, and, we'll try to wrap it up here soon, but Penn State laying 44.5. Do you think James Franklin goes for 2, does an onside kick, or both in the second half to cover that spread?
Yes, and yes to any other questions in that same vein, because James Franklin is one of those guys where he's literally said it. He's come out and said it, and I kind of respect the statement. But last year or 2 years ago, he came out and said, I think it was actually Maryland that was upset about him still passing up, 28 points in the fourth quarter. But he said, well, listen, you can have it one or two ways. I keep my starters in and we can just take a knee, or I can take my starters out, put the backups in. But if the backups go in, they deserve to play football. And I 100% agree with that. I think that's a total players coach type of sentiment, or even a statement rather, because if your backups never see the field in their life, all the walk-ons you have in the world only see one game in their college career, and it's just like, all right, you guys are running, a draw again. All right, take a knee. That's not fair to them. That's not playing football. If you're going up against the second teamers, you should be able to stop the second teamers. And from that standpoint, I do think, Penn State's probably good for covering a lot of these crazy, spreads against inferior opponents.
I can't wait to see them line up for 2, and it'll just be like they're up like 38, and it's like, what are you doing here? But it's typical James Franklin. And then, I'm with you. Why sugarcoat it? Just come out and be like, hey, we knew what the line was. We're gonna kick the crap out of them, and that's what we're gonna do. And Nevada got a payday out of it. But I guess give me 3 games that might be in the video, or your first week 1 or week 0 video picks, and what might be your best bet.
Well, I think when you're looking at my best bet, it's going to be that South Florida +6, included with the money line against Boise State. USF is just going to be one of those teams that I've really gravitated towards, and I really have a strong belief in. I'm also probably going to be betting on that Syracuse game that we mentioned. Another one that actually is going to be taking place in week 1 on a Thursday night alongside that South Florida Boise State game is East Carolina taking on NC State.
Your boy, CJ.
Yeah, and this is like one of those, rivalries from, that kind of went dormant because they stopped scheduling one another. But when ECU was kind of rolling back in the 90s, this was a team and this was a rivalry where East Carolina had NC State's number over and over and over again. And then NC State kind of, I don't know what you want to call it, but they backed out of the rivalry, essentially. Losing to a school in a non-Power 5 conference was a little bit of a no-no back then, and just in general. But now it's being relived, and I do think from the standpoint of that game, we're going to see some fireworks. And I don't know whether or not I want to take ECU on the 11.5 line, but I really do love the over. I think we're going to see points regardless. And from that standpoint with CJ Bailey, I think he goes out there and has a really good start to the season, or has the upside to. And from that standpoint, that only kind of helps my over case there.
I guess NC State took a page out of Mike Krzyzewski's book by suddenly not playing Maryland anymore after they left the
Right.
ACC, and it's
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
oh, don't know where that one came from. Well, maybe it's because we were kicking your ass every now and then, you know what I mean? But I'll digress on that for basketball season, Rob. But when I saw that Maryland Duke projection in the NCAA tournament, I'm like, be still my heart. You know what I mean? If that ends up being a Sweet 16 matchup there, you would have had to revive me. But yeah, well, you'll on one of the videos, or you'll just when you post on X, you'll have to have a Marco Romano play of the day where I come in and I give a pick, and we'll see how I stack up against you there. But I'll be on Toledo probably as well as Syracuse. But yeah, definitely agree with you on South Florida there. So I guess just to wrap things up here, man, what is the strategy and how have things differed from the last couple of years with all the information that's out there and the transfer portal, and can you rely on certain information? Like, you as a bettor, how has that kind of changed what you do, given so many games that there are in college football every week? Is it like you're more passive, or are you being a little bit more selective? Are you trusting a little bit more information? Like, what is that like, and what is your advice to bettors early in the season?
Well, what I actually think it ends up happening is coaches are competitive right out the gate, right? I mean, we saw with Kurt Cignetti at Indiana last year, where you can just import rosters essentially, and not only just find or bring over your QB, but find your QB from the MAC, and all of a sudden you're a playoff team. And that never used to be the case. It used to be head coach with an identity, with a culture that he wants to build, has to go start anew and start fresh with a bunch of high schoolers who don't understand,
Right.
what it is to be an adult. Well, now you have the portal where you can go get those guys out the gate and be competitive out the gate. And so I latch to coaches when it comes to football, because not only just managing the 22 starters, but managing the depth behind them and the development that happens in the season. I think a guy like a Matt Entz at Fresno State is a perfect example as to why I'm back in Fresno State out the gate, because I'm believing in that coaching. I kind of know exactly what's going to be instilled. You can see the makeup of the roster and say, yep, that looks exactly like he's building North Dakota State up again, or rebuilding the linebacker core in just 1 year at USC to actually be a competitive unit. You can see that across the board at a number of different institutions, a number of different programs. And it's like the programs that don't have a true identity and don't stick to it. Like, I look at Luke Fickell when he joined Wisconsin. Right out the gate, I was fading Wisconsin, because guess what they branched away from for the first time in 5 decades? The power
Running the
run
ball.
game. Yeah. They were just like, you know what? We're going to air it out 50 times a game. And I was like, let's see how long that lasts. And now if Luke Fickell's on the hot seat, all of a sudden it's back in the cards to run the football again, and they're going to try it out. Well, I don't believe in those types of coaches, because they don't believe in what they're even running half the time. So yeah, from that standpoint, I want to buy into the guys who I know have a proven track record, have the identity to build it, and actually tried to build it in the offseason. And that's where I think the pocket with this transfer portal ends up really paying dividends.
And at what week do you adjust? Is it like kind of 4 weeks in the season, 8 weeks in the season? Like, how do you adjust your strategy in betting and base it off of kind of what you've seen, given the sample size for the year and, obviously the other factors like injuries, or is it kind of just week by week for you?
I think you can see competency right out the gate in just 1 or 2 games. Like, you can see how well a quarterback can spin it. You can see how well an offensive line holds up against inferior competition or good competition right out the gate. And so I'm adjusting immediately, after I see a team play, because I'm wanting to know whether or not they confirmed what I was looking at, or what I believe them to be, or, did they kind of go anti against it, and I need to kind of reposition myself. Now, there are kind of those middle ground teams, like we're going to see an Indiana take on Old Dominion. We're going to see Penn State, go up against Nevada. And those might be just slaughters where we only see a half of the starting unit. But typically, if you can get 2 full games under your belt of just viewing these teams, I kind of know what they're about, and I can kind of measure up against where I projected them to be right out the gate there too.
Awesome. Well, great stuff, Rob. Give a plug to all of your social media, your pages and everything, and tell people where they can find you.
Well, hey, Marco, I appreciate you inviting me on, brother. And,
Yeah, man.
for those who want to follow my bets throughout college football season or my Major League Baseball bets that now that we're currently in season, YouTube/X, and it's going to be at Rob DFB on X or Rob Donaldson on YouTube. But I appreciate inviting me on, man.
Yeah, during you talking here, I just got a notification that Dylan Beaver's driven Samuel Basallo, and I'm like, oh my God, Orioles 2026 here. I'm like, this is what we've been waiting for here. And I'm like, I want to see much, much more of that next year. But yeah, great stuff, man. I appreciate you coming on as always. And yeah, I'm very, very truthful when I say that Rob's one of the best in the business here. And what I love about you, man, is that you take ownership if you do lose a game, but you give great analysis on your bets. You know what I mean? And there's reasons why you're where you're at. And, if you take it on the chin, you let everybody know. There's not too many people out there that do that, and are as credible as you. So we definitely appreciate it as followers of you, man. And let's go on a heater this year. And Toledo and Syracuse and South Florida, we're cashing week 0 and week 1.
Let's do it.
Have a good one, man.
Yeah, me too.
See ya.